national emergency showdown. Several Republicans side with Democrats as lawmakers debate the president's declaration. We're at the Capitol. In Venezuela, opposition leader Juan Guaido returns to the troubled country with renewed commitment to topple Maduro. Vatican archives. Pope Francis decides to make public documents on Pope Pius XII. Why Jewish advocates welcome the move. And the Bishop of Rome. The Holy Father spends time with parishioners in the Eternal City. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 4th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Senate has the votes to reject President Donald Trump's border emergency. The House already opposed his declaration. Kentucky's Rand Paul is the fourth Republican to object to the president's move to transfer money from other federal funds to build the wall. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. 51 is the magic number. 51 senators need to vote to block the president's national emergency. So let's look at the math. There are 47 Democrats and independents. If all oppose, plus 4 Republicans, that means 51 votes, just enough to stop the president.
Senator Rand Paul supports the wall, but he's against the president's emergency declaration, writing, "The broad principle of separation of powers in the Constitution delegates the power of the purse to Congress." He's one of 4 Republicans opposing the president.
Do we want the executive branch, now or in the future, to hold the power that the founders deliberately entrusted to Congress?
President Trump defends himself.
And a lot of people talk about precedent, that if we do this, the Democrats will use national emergency powers for something that we don't want. They're going to do that anyway, folks. The best way to stop that is to make sure that I win the election. That's the best way to stop that.
The president's national emergency sets him up to move $3.6 billion from military construction funds to build the wall.
I'm very concerned with having murderers and drug traffickers and drugs and drug cartels pouring into our country.
But the House last week voted against the president's declaration.
The yeas are 245, the nays are 182.
They need to follow their heart. I'm just suggesting they take their brain with them.
Republican Senator John Kennedy says Congress already gave the president the authority.
I think we do have a crisis at the border. I would have preferred that we not have to use this option of a national emergency. I would prefer to have Congress do its job, but in my opinion, Congress didn't, and so the president's doing his.
The showdown forces Republicans to take a very hard vote. If they disapprove the president, it could hurt them with GOP voters. Now, if the Senate passes it, it would go to the president, and he's promised to veto it. Lauren?
So then will Congress override the veto? Probably not, right?
Congress is not likely to have the votes. 66 senators are needed to override the president's promised veto, plus 290 representatives. That's 45 short of what it got last week when it passed the House.
Capitol Hill correspondent and mathematician Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper says he is running for president.
As a skinny kid with Coke bottle glasses and a funny last name, I've stood up to my fair share of bullies.
The Democrat says he wants to bring people together, something he did as a liberal working in a politically divided state. The 67-year-old supports abortion rights and same-sex marriage. Former Attorney General Eric Holder says nope, he is not running for president. Made the announcement today in an editorial in the Washington Post. Instead, his focus will be on electing Democrats nationwide in 2020. House Democrats launch a sweeping new investigation of President Trump. Members of the Judiciary Committee are going to probe everything from his campaign and businesses to his time at the White House. More than 50 people are going to be hearing from that committee. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump had plenty to say about Democrats while speaking to a group of conservatives here in Washington over the weekend. Among other things, he slammed their position on abortion. But today, the president responding to this new round of investigations aimed right at him.
Democrats announced their plans to investigate the president, focusing on possible obstruction of justice, corruption, and abuse of power charges. The president asked today if he will cooperate.
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax. You're going to learn about that as you grow older. It's a political hoax. 45th president. Thank you.
The president making the remarks today at the White House while hosting the North Dakota State football team. The House Judiciary Committee is sending document requests to 81 people linked to the president and his associates. Although the president sounding willing to work with Democrats today, his criticism loud and clear on Twitter Sunday. He writes, "Presidential harassment by crazed Democrats at the highest level in the history of our country." And over the weekend, in a more than 2-hour, at times off-script speech at the annual gathering of conservatives in Washington, President Trump continued the attack.
Democrat lawmakers are now embracing socialism. They want to replace individual rights with total government domination.
Blasting the party for a proposed law to combat climate change.
New Green Deal, or whatever the hell they call it.
And saying the Democrats have embraced a radical abortion agenda.
Just this week, Senate Democrats opposed legislation to prevent the killing of newborn infant children who survive abortions. Virtually every Democrat voted against protecting these precious babies. Everyone.
As investigations involving President Trump ramp up on Capitol Hill, the question is being asked, will Democrats seek impeachment? Congressman Jerry Nadler, who would play a lead role in those efforts, says it's a long way down the road, but he does say it's very clear the president has obstructed justice in the Russia investigation. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. At least 23 people, including one child, are dead after the deadliest tornado in 6 years tore through Alabama yesterday. Officials fear the death toll may rise as the search continues for survivors. The storm had winds of 160 miles per hour. The United States closes its consulate in Jerusalem. For decades, it primarily had served the people from the Palestinian territory, and they are now going to work with a group in the new U.S. Embassy to Israel, also in Jerusalem. The Trump administration says the decision does not signal a policy shift toward Palestinians. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo insists a woman who secretly fled Alabama to marry an ISIS fighter in 2014 is not an American citizen. But lawyers for Hoda Mutata are challenging the government in court, saying she is an American and wants to come home. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Today, a federal judge struck down a request by Hoda Mutata's lawyers, who asked to speed up her case since she is in a Syrian refugee camp. It's considered a small victory for the Justice Department. Lawyers on both sides are fighting over whether Mutata is officially an American citizen. The government says while she was born in New Jersey, she doesn't get birthright citizenship because her father was a diplomat from Yemen. Her case is raising another question, though. Should former ISIS fighters, or in this case an ISIS bride, be allowed back into the U.S.?
24-year-old Hoda Mutata is fighting for the right to return to the United States with her 18-month-old son. She says she regrets fleeing Alabama to go to Syria to join ISIS, also known as Daesh. Her lawyer says Mutata was deceived by radicals.
I think Hoda, in that sense, is another victim of Daesh. She resents them, she hates what they brainwashed her into becoming, and she honestly is tremendously relieved now that she sees the light.
While in Syria, Mutata called for the death of Americans on social media and spread ISIS propaganda. 2 weeks ago, President Trump tweeted, "I have instructed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and he fully agrees, not to allow Hoda Mutata back into the country." This weekend, Pompeo called her a terrorist, saying she put American lives at risk and that she should not return. Around the world, countries are facing the same problem. Mark Taylor is a New Zealand native who fled his country to join ISIS. He was captured in Syria.
So I'm sorry for causing too much trouble. I don't know if I can go back to New Zealand, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's really something that I have to live with the rest of my life.
Now that U.S.-backed forces are on the verge of taking back all of ISIS territory in Syria, former ISIS fighters are coming forward. This Dutch man, who married a British teenager while serving ISIS, says they were both wrong.
I hope that our governments and the people back there might consider giving us a second chance.
Secretary Pompeo says this is a global threat. Most countries around the world will not comment on individual cases, but in general, the State Department says foreign fighters should be prosecuted and detained in their home countries. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Catholic bishops in war-torn South Sudan say a recent peace treaty between the government and opposition leaders will fail. In a pastoral letter, they say it's fatally flawed and does not address root problems. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in the civil war that began in 2011. The Vatican's Secretary of State says it's time to implement the deal between the Holy See and China on the appointment of bishops. Cardinal Pietro Parolin says since the accord was signed last year, no new bishops have been named to Beijing. Pope Francis has decided to open the Vatican archives on Pope Pius XII, the leader of the Catholic Church during World War II. Pius XII has been criticized by Jews of staying silent on the Holocaust.
Avverrà il 2 marzo 2020.
During an audience with officials and personnel of the Vatican Secret Archives, the Holy Father announced the archive will be opening starting March 2nd, 2020. EWTN Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren has more.
Lauren, Pope Pius XII was elected pontiff on March 2nd, 1939, 6 months before World War II erupted in Europe. He died in October of 1958 at the summer residence of Casa Gandolfo near Rome. The Vatican usually waits 70 years after the end of a pontificate to open up the relevant archives. But in this case, the Holy See has been under pressure to make the Vatican's files on Pope Pius XII available sooner. Vatican archivists began under orders from Benedict XVI preparing documentation for consultation back in 2006. The Vatican has defended Pope Pius, saying he used behind-the-scenes diplomacy to try to save lives. Pope Francis indicated that he too supports that interpretation. Pius's actions will be studied closely since his cause for canonization is underway. The Holy Father indicated the Church is confident his papacy would withstand the findings by historians studying the archives. He said Pius was criticized, one can say, with some prejudice and exaggeration. Today, Pope Francis expressed confidence it's the right move. He said the Church isn't afraid of history. On the contrary, it loves it. Lauren, back to you.
Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you, Alan. Joining me now is Alan Ronkin, Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee in Washington, D.C. Alan, welcome back to our broadcast.
Great to be here.
The American Jewish Committee has called for the opening of the archives of Pope Pius XII for more than 30 years. What's your reaction?
Well, we're really very happy that the Vatican probably decided to open the archives. We're looking forward to having historians and scholars take a look at what's in there and draw the appropriate conclusions on history. It's really important, I think, to have that discussion.
Supporters like yourself say that it's important, especially when Holocaust survivors are still alive. What do you make of the timing of this announcement and its historical impact?
Well, I think, as you said, I mean, we're facing now an interesting opportunity because Holocaust survivors are still around. They can corroborate what the archives have to say, and they can also be validated in their stories, which I think is very, very important.
This week, a leadership delegation from your organization, the American Jewish Committee, is headed to the Vatican to have conversations. How important is the announcement to the relationship between Catholics and Jewish people?
I think it's extremely important. You know, since Nostra Aetate, the relationship between Catholics and Jews has only flourished and thrived, and it's something we've very, very much cherished. This will help improve that relationship even better as we get to know more about what happened in history, deal with some of the issues of the great failures, but also some of the amazing successes that took place during that time.
Do you think that anything negative could come out of this?
As Pope Francis said, the Church is interested in knowing history, and we agree. Whatever happened, happened. We need to face it, we need to focus on that, and also move forward and use this as a building block to building stronger relationships as we go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. Alan Ronkin, Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Coming up on our broadcast, the Washington Post's editor's note on the coverage of this video involving students from a Catholic high school, and First Lady Melania Trump takes her Be Best campaign on the road. 3 Catholic bishops in Tennessee say they are against state lawmakers attempting to enact a heartbeat bill, despite believing in the sanctity of human life. Here's why. In a joint statement released last week, they say in part, quote, every pro-abortion victory in the courts further strengthens the Roe versus Wade precedent and makes Roe that much more difficult to overturn. While they support the intention of the heartbeat bill, the bishops cite hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, which have to be paid then to Planned Parenthood if the law is overturned. The Washington Post says it was wrong. It released an editor's note about its coverage of a viral video involving students from a Catholic high school in Kentucky. This says, in part, subsequent reporting, a student's statement, and additional video allow for a more complete assessment of what occurred, either contradicting or failing to confirm accounts provided in that initial story. Nick Sandman, one of the students from Covington Catholic High, has filed a $250 million lawsuit against the paper. First Lady Melania Trump visits Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first stop of a 3-state tour to help children.
What's your name?
It's part of her Be Best initiative aimed at child well-being, online safety, and bullying prevention. She will also visit Seattle and Las Vegas. This is her first solo domestic overnight trip as First Lady. Up next on our broadcast tonight, the political turmoil in Venezuela, what it means now that the opposition leader has returned to the country, and the Holy Father's recommendation as he meets with his flock. Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido is back in the troubled country, and he remains committed to toppling the socialist government of Nicolas Maduro. Guaido left Ecuador yesterday to return home. He successfully passed through security at the main airport outside of Caracas. There had been fears he would be arrested after ignoring an official travel ban. Dozens of countries have recognized Guaido as the country's legitimate leader, saying last year's re-election of Maduro was invalid. And joining me now is Emanuele Ottolenghi, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back to our broadcast.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. President Maduro threatened Juan Guaido with arrest if he returned. And National Security Advisor John Bolton tweeted, continued U.S. support for Guaido, saying any threats or acts against his safe return will be met with a strong and significant response from the United States and the international community. And as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said, the world is watching. So how does his return raise the stakes in this political standoff?
Well, it raises the stakes because it shows that the Venezuelan bureaucracy is not taking the travel ban against Guaido seriously. I mean, the president landed at the airport, walked through the immigration.
Hang on,
and
you're saying the president.
The president
okay,
of Venezuela,
you were saying
yes.
then that Juan Guaido is the president, and that is not what the Maduro regime is saying, but continue.
Yes, but that's what most of the international community is saying, that Juan Guaido is the interim president. And he walked through immigration. He was stamped in by the immigration officials. So that is a sign that the Maduro regime's threats were empty and that they no longer have the assured loyalty of the country's bureaucracy.
That's exactly what Guaido said. You're sort of speaking his talking points here. He said that easily getting through means the chain of command is broken. We talked about the role of Venezuela's military last time you were on the program in any sort of government transition, and soldiers have deserted, and yet we do have a video that shows that there is support, thousands of supporters right here rallying for Maduro. So what does that say about the future of his control? You can see people here do still support it.
Well, you know, you can go back and watch rallies in support of communist regimes in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe up to 1988, 1989. When people are forced to go and show support, or their well-being or food on the table depends on it, they will go, and that's what authoritarian regimes do. But the bottom line is this, that the support for Juan Guaido and what the opposition is doing in Venezuela to restore democracy enjoys wide support, and the regime is crumbling. The fact that you have had a small but significant number of defections from the military is another sign that they can no longer count automatically on the support from the one institution in the government that can guarantee Maduro's resistance in power.
Vice President Mike Pence went to meet with Guaido, and then he put sanctions on Venezuela. On Friday, we put more sanctions on Venezuela, and this time it was on security forces in response to blocking
six people who had been
aid and
in
convoys.
the sort of in the chain of command, ordering violence and all those random and crazy acts, attacking the trucks. And,
but they're not working. It's still, let me ask the question instead of state the answer. Do you think that sanctions are working?
Most of these people who are being targeted have plundered the resources of state and have put that money abroad. By putting these names on the list, the US government is putting financial institutions the world over on notice that the assets of these people belong to the Venezuelan people and they have to be restored to them. So I think that we will see in the long term that these sanctions work. They also work as a deterrent against those who are not yet sanctioned, as an encouragement that maybe if they switch now, they'll avoid the worst consequences.
All right, thank you so much, Emanuele Ottolenghi, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.
Thank you for having me.
Finally tonight, a parish in Rome received a visit yesterday afternoon from their bishop, Pope Francis. The Holy Father is the Bishop of Rome. He met parishioners at St. Crispin in the northern part of the Eternal City. He also celebrated Mass, giving the faithful 2 recommendations, and they are good ones. Ready? 1, pray often. 2, avoid gossiping and speaking badly of others, or as my mother in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania says, don't say anything you don't want printed on the front page of the newspaper. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.